Well, we know and we've learned so much more over time about the different ways that autism spectrum disorder affects our children and those throughout their lives as well. And joining us now to talk about some of the ways that this issue is addressed and even treated is Dr. Bonnie Price-Linden with Linden Neuropsychological Services. Dr. Linden, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you on. And it's interesting because we've learned so much over the course of time, even over just the last 10 years, about the variety of different ways that autism can affect children and affect adults as well. But not so much has been maybe discussed about the variety of different treatments for autism spectrum disorder and how those treatments have evolved over time. So, as we begin, tell us about some of the different ways that you and your practice treats autism spectrum disorder and how some of these different treatments have maybe evolved over time to become perhaps more effective.
Well, I think that we are learning more and more about the causes of autism. And as we begin to understand it from how the brain is operating, we are better able to focus our treatment plans on uh, helping the brain to function in a better way. And so I've been working in the last perhaps 5 to 6 years on linking movement and sound, which is becoming more and more the a way in, of causing the brain to increase its excitability, increase its output, and therefore helping the children focus better. So I've been working on that system, and I have found it very effective.
Just how much more effective has early intervention been over the course of time, especially in recent years, and just how important is that early intervention in determining the outcomes of children in particular who are on the autism spectrum?
That is the most important issue that we are looking at for those of us who treat autism. How early should we be intervening? Early intervention is crucial. Identifying these kids almost from the time of birth can be done by watching how they track with their eyes. And if we do this more earlier and more effectively, at least I have found, and I believe which is true in the whole field, is that we are much more effective in helping the child reach much more normal functioning. So I think early intervention is crucial.
And how are those early interventions implemented? What are you looking for when you are faced with a patient who with a pediatric patient on the autism spectrum in terms of what you're looking for and what might be the most effective treatment for that individual, given that this is a spectrum and autism is going to affect different people in different ways?
That's a really good question because it is so diverse. Uh, I don't think in looking at a child, you specifically say, well, they have this kind of manifestation or that symptom. You're looking at the whole picture. Is that child progressing? And then you sort of say, well, okay, in what ways is the child not progressing? But in general, what you're doing is pretty much the same thing, regardless of the severity of the symptoms. You are working to enable the brain to uh, it, to much more excitability, much more intensity, and you are hoping that as you move through interventions such as movement and pairing that with a sound, that you are going to see the child hold and continue to progress, regardless of whether or not this is some kind of a deterioration that's going on within the brain. So it's a neuromuscular disorder as well. You're always staying focused on keeping that child moving. And the issue is to get them moving as early as possible. So literally you can watch them as almost newborns, and you can say to some degree of certainty this child is going to evidence some kind and is evidencing some kind of interference in their progression. And so from my point of view, I think the earlier we can get in there and have the children come in to see someone who is able to assess it is just beneficial to the child and the family.
More information can be found on Linden Neuropsychological Services.com. You can also call them toll free at 833-333-3595. Toll free call 833-333-3595 for more information and to make an appointment with their offices here in Michigan as well as in New York. Dr. Price-Linden, as we talk about early intervention and we discuss getting those treatments for particularly kids as early as possible on the autism spectrum disorder to have the best outcomes as possible. Let's go into some detail about what some of those different treatments may be and how those treatments ultimately do help to not necessarily reverse the causes of autism, but to help these kids adjust to better outcomes ultimately on the other side as they continue their treatment.
Well, the first thing you do with any child is, particularly on the spectrum, is it takes a village. You are using treatments from occupational therapy, physical therapy, uh, ABA, if that is makes sense to use with that particular child. But when they're very young, ABA would not fit into that idea. But you get them moving with OT and PT. Um, I think that's basically it because at that point, it's a very solitary situation for that child. Putting them into groups, perhaps when they're 3 years old, might be helpful, but it's mostly very focused on attention and developing and helping that child to be very active. So things even like gymnastics when they get older. Uh, Anything that is physical and anything that is moving them is very helpful to them because as we learn more and more about the brain, we are seeing, and I think perhaps we need to relabel autism as not just a social disorder, but some kind of deterioration of the way that the neurodevelopment is taking place. I think if we understand that, then we are much better able to act effectively on behalf of the children. So, because of the diversity, I've had children come in who literally had no strength at all, could not stand up, could not walk, could not ambulate. And as opposed to some children that don't have any of that, then some children can speak and others can. So it is very, very diverse. So it has to be a general approach, almost in effect, a shotgun approach, which is focused on movement, activity, sound pairing. Uh, that's pretty much how I see it.
We're joined by Dr. Bonnie Price-Linden on today's edition of the Megacast from Linden Neuropsychological Services, where she is the director of that organization. More information can be found Linden Neuropsychological Services.com. Linden Neuropsychological Services.com is her website. Dr. Linden, before we let you go, anything else that we should be considering at this time or parents should be considering about interventions with their child's autism and getting the right treatment at the right time to make sure their kid has as best of an outcome as possible with this diagnosis?
I think that's an easy one. I think it's most important that a parent not feel, let's wait and see. Let's give it time. I think that is the most crucial mistake that happens. I've had parents approach me in just in a store. I have a 5-month-old who's not progressing. That's a child who should be seen. The parent has the best sense of when the child is not moving along properly, and they often have that sense right at the beginning, right after birth. That's a child who should be evaluated by someone who can look at the child and make some, at least give you some thoughts about where the child is at. Waiting is not in the best interest of the family or the child.
You can consult with Dr. Price-Linden and the professionals at Linden Neuropsychological Services by visiting their website, lindenneuropsychologicalservices.com, as well as making a toll-free call for an appointment at 833-333-3595 with locations here in Michigan, in Plymouth, as well as in Brooklyn, New York. Dr. Price-Linden, thank you so much for joining us and discussing this today.
Thank you.